Most people do not fear suffering because it hurts. They fear it because it interrupts the story they were telling themselves about who they are. Pain has a way of stripping away decoration. It humiliates the fantasy of control. It exposes how much of a human life is built on fragile agreements with comfort. As long as I am safe, I will call myself strong. As long as I am loved, I will call myself worthy. As long as life is kind, I will call myself whole. Then suffering arrives, and suddenly the performance collapses. What remains is not the person you imagined yourself to be, but the person you actually are when nothing protects you from reality. This is why Nietzsche never treated suffering as a detour from life. He treated it as one of life's most ruthless revelations. Not because pain is sacred, and not because misery is noble in itself, but because the human being who has never been broken remains mostly untested, mostly inherited, mostly borrowed from the crowd. Comfort makes imitation easy. It lets you wear second-hand values and mistake them for identity. But suffering creates a violent separation between what is merely convenient and what is true. It asks a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. When the world stops rewarding you, what still lives inside you? Greatness begins there, in that unbearable silence after illusion has been removed. Not in applause, not in talent, not in early success, but in the moment when pain makes your old self impossible and you are forced to decide whether to become smaller or deeper. Nietzsche understood that suffering is not valuable because it makes you feel special. It is valuable because it destroys the soft, sentimental lies that keep you mediocre. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. That line is not a slogan. It is a diagnosis. The average person suffers and immediately asks how to escape. The exceptional person suffers and asks what this pain is trying to carve out of them. What makes this so difficult is that modern life trains you to interpret all discomfort as a mistake. Every inconvenience is treated like an injustice. Every obstacle becomes a reason to retreat. We have built a culture around the management of pain, but not around its transformation. And so people become experts at avoiding struggle while secretly wondering why they feel so empty. Nietzsche saw this emptiness long before our age gave it new language. It is the sickness of nihilism, the collapse of meaning that follows when a person no longer has the strength to justify existence through creation, discipline, or self-overcoming. When suffering comes to a weak spirit, it often turns into resentment. The person cannot master the pain, so they moralize it. They blame life, blame others, blame the world for demanding too much. This is the psychology of ressentiment, the powerless rewriting their weakness as virtue because they cannot bear to confront it as weakness. And this is where suffering becomes the dividing line between the ordinary soul and the great one. The ordinary soul asks pain to leave. The greater soul lets pain speak. Not forever, not masochistically, but honestly. Nietzsche's point was never that one should worship suffering. It was that one should stop wasting it. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every season of isolation contains a brutal invitation. Either collapse into bitterness or use the wound as material. This is the deeper meaning of the will to power. It is not simply domination over others, as shallow readers assume. It is the capacity to shape chaos instead of being shaped by it, to impose form on suffering, to turn injury into intelligence, grief into depth, and loneliness into independence. Greatness is not the absence of damage. Greatness is what some rare people do with damage. That is why Nietzsche could say, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," and means something far more demanding than motivational optimism. He did not mean that every painful event automatically improves you. Most pain does not elevate a person. It deforms them if they meet it passively. It hardens them into suspicion, self-pity, dependency, or cruelty. Strength is not what pain gives you. Strength is what you forge in your response to pain. Suffering offers raw material, nothing more. It can become poison, or it can become power. The difference lies in whether you remain a victim of experience or become its interpreter, its sculptor, its author. There is something almost offensive in this idea because it takes away one of the ego's favorite comforts, the belief that pain itself earns you moral importance. It does not. Suffering proves nothing by itself. Many people suffer and become smaller, meaner, more dishonest, more eager to drag others down into the same darkness. Nietzsche had little patience for this hidden vanity of weakness. He understood slave morality not simply as social obedience, but as the instinct to turn incapacity into judgment, to condemn strength because one lacks it, to glorify meekness because one cannot create. In this state, suffering becomes a tool of accusation. But in a higher state, suffering becomes a furnace. It burns away dependency on praise. It reveals whether your values are actually yours. It forces you to stop asking, "How can life be easier?" and begin asking, "What kind of soul is this life trying to demand from me?" The answer is rarely comforting. Greatness is not gentle on the self that seeks to become great. It asks for the death of old identities. It asks you to outgrow the need to be understood by everyone around you. It asks you to survive periods where nothing externally confirms your path. This is why Nietzsche's vision of self-overcoming feels so severe. The self is not something to protect at all costs. The self, as most people know it, is often a prison made of habit, fear, borrowed morality, and herd approval. To become more, something in you must be sacrificed. Not your humanity, but your vanity. Not your sensitivity, but your dependence. Not your desire for meaning, but your demand that meaning arrive without struggle. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Chaos is not a flaw in the process, it is the process. And perhaps this is what people misunderstand most. They think greatness looks like confidence. In reality, it often looks like endurance. It looks like staying with the difficult thing long enough for it to transform you. It looks like refusing cheap consolation. It looks like carrying pain without turning it into theater. The strongest people are not always those who appear hard. Often, they are the ones who have suffered enough to stop dramatizing themselves, enough to stop begging reality to be different, enough to practice what Nietzsche called Amor, Fati, the love of fate. Not mere acceptance, but a deeper and more terrifying affirmation. This too belongs to my path. This too can be used. This too, if I have the courage, can become part of my becoming. To love fate is not to enjoy suffering. It is to stop insulting your own life by wishing only for the edited version of it. It is to understand that the dark chapters were not interruptions of your becoming, but its hidden architecture. The betrayal taught you to see clearly. The loneliness taught you to stand without witnesses. The failure taught you the difference between ambition and vanity. The grief taught you what cannot be replaced. The humiliation taught you how much of your identity depended on external mirrors. Piece by piece, suffering dismantles the false foundations. And if you do not flee too early, something sterner and more luminous begins to emerge. A person who no longer needs life to be painless in order to call it good. This is the secret that frightens most people. Once you truly understand it, you can no longer romanticize comfort the same way. You begin to see how many lives are spent in quiet self-betrayal, not because people are evil, but because they are unwilling to pay the price of becoming themselves. They would rather remain intact than become real. But Nietzsche's deeper challenge was always directed toward the rare individual who senses that safety is too small a purpose, the one who suspects that suffering, however cruel, may be the chisel through which a higher form is made. Not guaranteed, not mercifully, but possibly. And in that possibility lies the birth of a different kind of human being. One who does not ask life to spare them, but asks only for the strength not to waste what life has given. So the real question is not whether suffering is necessary. For any serious life, it is inevitable. The question is whether you will meet it as an enemy that humiliates you, or as a severe teacher that initiates you. Whether pain will turn you against life, or drive you deeper into it. Whether you will use your wounds as evidence that the world has wronged you, or as raw material for a harder, freer, more dangerous kind of becoming. Because greatness has never belonged to the permanently comfortable. It belongs to those who can walk through ruin without making ruin their identity, who can descend without worshiping despair, who can lose pieces of themselves and still say yes to existence. And if eternal recurrence were true, if you had to live this same life again and again in every detail, the measure of your soul would be this. Could you one day look at even your suffering and say, without bitterness, this too was necessary? Thank you for being part of Intelligence Wisdom. If something here stayed with you, don't ignore it. Sit with it. And if you want to keep exploring the deeper layers of the mind, consider subscribing.